my family or cult. The secret ritual they buried for generations, until I fought back, and then. In my family, we're taught that love is eternal, but the truth is much darker. What really lasts is obedience. Control that reaches beyond the grave. When a husband dies, his wife has 41 days to join him in death. That's the service rite. It isn't symbolic. It's real. And nobody escapes without help. I was 6 the first time I saw it happen. My Aunt Darla wore a dress that wasn't hers and pearls she didn't own. She looked like someone playing a role she didn't audition for. Her hands shook, but she still served tea to every family member like tradition demanded. Then someone handed her the cup, the one with the green lilies, and everyone watched her drink. The silence was loud enough to make my ears ring. Later, they said she chose it, that she wanted to go, that a wife's place is beside her husband, even in death. But I saw the way her mother-in-law gripped her arm, steadying the cup when she hesitated. I saw her lips tremble. They didn't see fear. I did, and I never forgot. My mother, Karen, never explained the rite. She didn't have to. She counted my dad's gray hairs like she was doing algebra, calculating the number of years she might have left. When I turned 13, she shook me awake at 2 in the morning. There was a pin in my hand before I knew what was happening. She said, "Practice this signature until it's perfect." And I did, over and over again. First my dad's, then hers, then names I didn't recognize. I learned how to forge medical records, how to transfer money without being traced. I learned what states had weak identity checks and how to disappear without leaving footprints. By 15, I could build a new person from scratch in under an hour. I memorized bus routes to border towns. I knew which cameras worked and which didn't. Mom never said it out loud, but I knew the plan. If my dad died, she had 41 days to vanish, or they'd dress her in white and lay her beside a photo like they did with Darla. And she wasn't planning to go alone. There's a network. No name. Just a collection of women who faked their deaths and started over. Some used chemical cocktails to mimic death. Others had help from doctors who owed favors. Some used empty caskets, staged funerals. The family called them martyrs. But they were alive. They were free. We used coded language to talk about them. She passed peacefully meant she escaped. She fought till the end meant something had gone wrong. Every story mattered. Every file we collected was another name we didn't lose. At 17, I joined the work. I stayed after school in the yearbook lab, printing fake ID cards and scanning forged licenses. My teacher thought I was dedicated to design. I was building new lives. Then came the knock. Just past 2 a.m. The house was still. Mom was asleep on the couch, a burner phone beside her. I was in the kitchen when I heard it. 3 hard knocks. A pause. Then one more. She was barefoot, bruised, and out of breath. Her coat was gone. Her heels were bleeding. She was maybe 20, no older. Her hands were clenched into fists. "Are you Karen?" she asked. Before I could speak, Mom was already behind me, pulling her inside without a word. She shut the door fast and drew the curtains. The girl's name was Lena. Her husband had died 5 days earlier. She had 36 days left. They'd taken her shoes and her phone. Her credit cards were canceled. Her room was locked from the outside at night. Her husband had been 67. His 3 previous wives had all followed the rite. Their countdowns finished without protest. Lena was wife number 4. And she was pregnant. She hadn't come to run. She'd come to fight. Lena barely made it 3 steps into the living room before collapsing onto the floor. Her breathing was ragged, like she'd sprinted across town. Her feet left bloody prints on the hardwood. I grabbed a towel and knelt beside her while Mom locked every door and switched off the hallway lights. The porch camera was already disabled. Lena wasn't shaking from the cold. She was shaking from fear. We gave her water. I wrapped her feet in gauze and medical tape. Her left ankle was swollen, possibly twisted. But she didn't cry. Not once. She just stared straight ahead like she hadn't even landed yet, like she was still back in that house, trapped under someone's name she didn't choose. That night, we didn't sleep. Lena told us everything in pieces. How they took her phone and burned her SIM card in the sink. How Eli's niece followed her to the bathroom every time. How one of the uncles jammed a nail through the window lock so it couldn't open even an inch. They were holding her like she was already dead. They'd even made her help plan the ceremony. Ironic, really. Choosing her own white dress. Writing farewell notes to family. Picking flowers for the altar where she was supposed to kneel and smile while her lungs filled with poison. And then she said it. She didn't want to run. She wanted to end it. Not just her ceremony. All of it. Mom looked at her like she was holding a live grenade. She tried to explain how dangerous that was. The network didn't go public. That was the whole point. Nobody risked open confrontation. The escape worked only because we operated in shadows. Lena just shook her head. If I run, they'll say I died anyway. They'll keep doing this to other girls. I'm not going anywhere. The decision was hers. But from that moment on, we were all in it with her. We built a plan fast. She had to return before someone noticed she was missing. The ants on night watch would have already started rotating shifts. But if she got back before sunrise, it would still look like she'd gone to the bathroom. We cleaned her up. I sewed the tear in her skirt. Mom gave her a burner phone and wrote down emergency code words. If Lena sent the word milk, it meant she was in immediate danger. If she said weather, it meant she needed extraction. We practiced the phrases like they were lifelines. Lena limped back toward her prison just before dawn. She slipped in through the laundry room window using the route we mapped out for her. No one saw her. That was day 6. By day 10, the family had finalized the ceremony date. Day 33. At sunset, at the chapel near the cemetery where Eli's first 2 wives were buried. The third one, apparently, had been cremated. Rumor was she screamed too much during her final moments, and they didn't want the neighbors hearing. I started building Lena's new identities. 3 full profiles. Different names, birthplaces, resumes. I forged health insurance records and employment history. Created a LinkedIn page for a 32-year-old florist named Camille. Even gave her a fake dog with adoption paperwork. People trust pet owners more. Meanwhile, Lena played the part of the grieving wife with terrifying precision. She wept when they gave her the dress. She helped iron napkins for the memorial lunch. She sat quietly during prayer meetings. She told Eli's sister how she missed the sound of his voice. Every night, she texted us updates using emojis and code phrases. She was deep behind enemy lines. And she was winning. But then something shifted. On day 13, she texted one word. Milk. It came through at 2:47 a.m. My phone buzzed once under my pillow. I jolted awake and ran to Mom's room. She was already up, staring at the same text on her screen. We didn't speak. We just moved. 10 minutes later, Lena sent a second message. Never mind. Handled it. We waited until morning to get the full story. One of the uncles had tried to sneak into her room. He was drunk. He had a key. But Lena had wedged a chair under the door hours earlier, something we told her to do every night. He left before anyone woke up. But it was a warning. They weren't going to wait for day 33. They were getting impatient. We called an emergency meeting. The network had dozens of members, but only a few operated locally. We gathered in the back room of a shuttered bakery owned by a woman named Rena, widow number 8, officially declared dead in 2009. She brought the blueprints of the chapel. Mom brought the forged death certificate, ready for signature. I brought the latest draft of Lena's new ID. But we had a problem. The chemical compound we usually used, the one that slows the heart enough to mimic death for 20 minutes, wasn't available. Our contact had been arrested for something unrelated, and nobody else could get the ingredients in time. That meant we had no escape method, no margin for error. That's when Lena surprised us again. She said we didn't need the compound, that she could switch the poison herself. She knew who prepared it. She knew where they stored it. She'd been watching. She offered to fake the poison using vinegar, ground almonds, and expired antihistamines, enough to cause tremors, nausea, and a slowdown in breathing. Nothing fatal, just believable. If someone checked her pulse too soon, they'd think she was gone. Everyone thought she was insane. Until Edna spoke. Eli's mother. 91. The family's silent shadow. The one who held the cup at every service right since 1972. Lena had been speaking to her. And somehow, the old woman cracked. She'd watched 12 daughters-in-law die. Maybe more. But when Lena placed her hand on her own stomach and whispered that she was carrying the last branch of the family's name, something broke loose. And Edna said she would help. The room went silent when we heard that. It felt like gravity shifted. Like the floor itself gave us permission to hope. She had a key to the poison cabinet. She would make the switch the night before the ceremony. All we had to do was get Lena through the next 19 days without being discovered. Then on day 17, we were nearly exposed. Lena texted us, weather. That meant things were escalating. We traced the problem to a niece named Tara, 16 years old and suspicious. She'd been asking questions. Why was Lena suddenly so calm? Why did she stop crying during the evening prayers? Why was Edna spending so much time in Lena's room? We acted fast. I forged fake letters from a hospice counselor addressed to Edna, pretending she'd been receiving therapy for late-life grief and finally found peace. Mom sent flowers anonymously with a card that read, "He's with God now. We're proud of your strength." It worked. Tara stopped asking. But we knew it wouldn't be the last time. Each day that passed felt like walking a tightrope in a thunderstorm. Lena's body was starting to fail from stress. Her ankles ached. Her nausea worsened. She couldn't eat solid food without gagging. But she didn't quit. Every night, she wrote letters. Not the kind the rite required. These were for the future. Letters to the daughters who would be born into this family. Letters about how to spot a lie wrapped in ceremony. Letters about survival. That's how I knew she wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing it for the next girl, too. The night of day 21, everything almost fell apart. They announced the test. Not the ceremony itself, just a loyalty test. Lena would have to prepare the ceremonial poison herself under full supervision. It wasn't optional. They said it was tradition, a final act of devotion. But we knew what it really was. They were watching her too closely now. Someone had started suspecting. The ants gathered in the kitchen like vultures. Grandmother Gloria sat in the corner, eyes sharp, holding a notebook filled with ingredients and proportions. Lena stood at the center of it all, her fingers steady, her jaw clenched. The room smelled like vinegar and crushed almonds. Death and ceremony wrapped together. I was allowed to be there that night, officially to help with dishes. In reality, I was watching the clock. Lena had only 45 minutes to execute the switch. Any longer, and Gloria would notice. The vial she prepared had to match the original in color, consistency, and scent. She'd practiced with us in secret using food dye and herbal extracts. But this wasn't rehearsal. This was real. Edna sat quietly across the room, acting half asleep, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Every now and then, I saw her glance toward Lena's wrist. That was our signal. Lena wore a loose bracelet that, if unclasped, meant danger. If tightened, it meant go. When she adjusted it tighter, I exhaled for the first time in minutes. She made the switch, right in front of them. She passed the final vial to Gloria with both hands. I held my breath. Gloria sniffed it, swirled it in the light, then gave a single nod. That was it. The false poison had passed. But the risk wasn't over. Gloria took the vial straight to the ceremonial cabinet and locked it herself. Then she clipped the key onto her necklace, tucked it inside her blouse, and announced that the final ceremony would take place not in the kitchen, but at the family's private chapel. It was a place we hadn't accounted for. No exits but the front. No windows. No cover. It felt like a trap. That same night, Lena sent a coded message. One route closed. Need alternate path. Mom and I mapped out 3 new exits. One through the flower delivery entrance. One through the crypt access tunnel in the back wall. And one through the attic, down a maintenance ladder. But each one came with risk, especially if guards were posted. We needed help from inside. We didn't expect that help to come from Micah. He was 24, Eli's nephew, and newly married. We didn't trust him. He was quiet, polite, too compliant. But he approached Mom at the grocery store, right between the onions and the canned soup, and asked if Lena had any chance of making it out. She said, out of what? He looked her in the eye and said, the right. Micah had started watching. Started asking questions after his own wife came home crying one night. Said she'd been told if Micah died, she'd have to follow. That it was expected. That no good wife would refuse. He didn't like that. So he offered to help. He wasn't alone. There were 3 others. Young men, married, scared. They'd grown up watching these ceremonies from the sidelines. They had always assumed it was tragic but consensual. But now, seeing Lena, pregnant, trapped, and exhausted, they started to see the cracks. Micah promised he could unlock the crypt door during the ceremony. It wasn't ideal. It led straight into the old storage wing, but it was something. We agreed, but warned him. If he wavered, even for a second, it could cost Lena her life. On day 27, things got worse. Gloria announced a new condition. Lena would sip the poison the night before the ceremony, as a demonstration of faith. Just a small amount, she said. Enough to prove she was committed. The real ceremony would still happen at dawn. But this was her last test. We had no backup plan. If she drank too much, it could trigger seizures. It could stop her heart. If she drank too little, they'd know it wasn't real. She'd be exposed. Edna tried to protest, saying Lena looked too weak, but Gloria silenced her. She said devotion required sacrifice. The sip would happen during sunset prayers. We couldn't stop it, so we waited. That evening, the whole family packed into the living room. The curtains were drawn. The air was thick. Gloria handed Lena the same porcelain cup with the green lilies. I stood at the edge of the room, pretending to take notes for funeral arrangements. I saw Lena's hand tremble. Then Edna collapsed. No warning. No scream. Just a sudden drop. Her head hit the floor with a sickening sound. The room exploded into chaos. The aunts rushed forward. Gloria screamed for someone to call the doctor. The cup fell from Lena's hand and shattered across the floor. The liquid spilled across the rug. Later, Lena told me it was all planned. Edna had faked a stroke. She'd practiced the fall, the shaking, even the limp hands. Everything. The woman who'd once enforced 12 ceremonies faked her own collapse to stop the 13th. It worked. Gloria was furious, but she couldn't override the optics. Edna was loaded into a van, supposedly heading to the hospital. But we knew better. She was safe. She was already on her way to a network location 3 towns over. Lena disappeared during the commotion, slipped out through the side door. Her guards were busy cleaning the mess. One of them cut her hand on the broken cup and needed stitches. Nobody noticed she was gone until midnight. That's when she texted. She hadn't run. She was still inside the chapel, hiding in a small storage room behind the altar, a place Edna had told her about years ago. It had been forgotten and used, filled with broken pews and dusty hymn books. The perfect place to wait. Her plan wasn't to escape anymore. She wanted them all to watch her die, and then watch her wake up. The sun rose on day 33 with a kind of silence that didn't feel natural. No birdsong, no traffic, just the sound of wind pushing dry leaves across the chapel steps. The final ceremony was set for dawn, and everyone in the family had already arrived. It was the kind of early morning where breath turned visible in the cold, and tension hung heavier than the sky. Lena emerged from the shadows exactly on time. She stepped through the back of the chapel as if she'd come from a different world. Her dress was white, long-sleeved, modest. Her hair was pinned up with 2 small combs, each carved with vines. They used to belong to Eli's first wife. A quiet message, one nobody could misinterpret. The chapel was packed. I counted over 80 people, all dressed in black, faces pulled tight like stretched rubber. Even the ones who used to joke about the service rite didn't laugh now. No one made eye contact with Lena, not even Gloria, who stood near the altar arranging the ceremonial table herself. The cup was there too, washed, polished, dried by hand. The same green lilies, the same fake holiness. But Lena didn't hesitate. She walked the aisle like it was a runway made of nails, each step slow and certain. Her eyes locked on Gloria's, never blinking. The ceremony began with a traditional hymn. I sang along quietly, like I always did. But this time, something was different. At least a dozen voices didn't join in. They mouthed the words, lips moving but soundless. Refusal, disguised as reverence. A rebellion hiding in plain sight. Then came the tea service. Lena poured tea for each of Eli's relatives. One by one, she bowed, knelt, offered the cup. Some accepted it with shaking hands. Some couldn't meet her gaze. One aunt sobbed silently the whole time, her tears soaking into her collar. When she reached Gloria, she didn't bow. She stood tall, eyes level. Gloria raised her chin but said nothing. Then the final step began. Gloria took the poisoned cup and held it like a sacred object. She didn't trust anyone else to do it. She walked it to Lena, both hands firm. I knew she was watching for the slightest hesitation, the smallest crack. Lena took the cup. She turned to face the crowd. And she spoke. She thanked Eli, said he had taught her patience and silence. She thanked the family for their guidance. And then, like peeling away a layer of skin, she shifted. She began to list names. Every widow who drank before her. Everyone who followed her husband. She said their names slowly, one by one, like prayer. Darla, Therese, Mina, Joy, Eliza. One of the aunts dropped her fan. A cousin stood up, then sat down again. Gloria's eyes narrowed, but she didn't interrupt. Lena kept going. She described how each woman died, who held their hands, who forced the cup to their lips, who signed the death certificates, who buried them under silence and song. By the time she finished, no one was breathing right. Then she raised the cup. She said nothing else, just drank. 3 long swallows. The entire chapel leaned forward as one. She placed the cup back on the altar. She walked to the kneeling cushion. Saturday. Folded her hands in her lap. Bowed her head. Then her body convulsed. It happened fast. Her legs kicked first, like something invisible had struck her. Her back arched. Her mouth opened. Foam gathered at the edge of her lips. Someone in the second row screamed. A child cried. I saw 3 cousins rush forward, only for Gloria to hold up a hand and stop them. She said, let her finish. This is what she wanted. But even Gloria flinched when Lena's head slammed backward against the floor. It wasn't a peaceful death. It was violent, raw, ugly. And it had to be. 5 minutes. That's how long the effects lasted. 5 minutes of shaking, gasping, twitching. Then stillness. Gloria approached. Checked for a pulse. Nodded once. She is gone. But then, it started with her fingers. A twitch. Then her shoulders. Then her mouth. She coughed. Lena coughed. The sound cut through the chapel like a gunshot. Gasps. Shouts. Someone dropped a chair. Gloria stepped back like the floor burned her feet. Lena sat up. Her face pale. Her lips cracked. But her eyes, clear, focused, awake. She looked at the entire family. And she spoke again. She told them everything. The network. The fake deaths. The women who'd survived. The ones who hadn't. The fake funerals. The hiding. The underground paths to freedom. The burning of identities. The building of new lives. She told them about me. About Mom. About Edna. About what Gloria did. What they all allowed. They tried to interrupt. Gloria yelled for silence. One of the uncles moved toward the altar. That's when the screens turned on. 6 monitors placed around the chapel, hidden behind curtains, disguised in floral stands, lit up. Footage began to play. Ceremonies. Real ones. Not staged. Not edited. Full recordings. Women crying. Begging. Cups forced into mouths. Some restrained. Some slapped. All silenced. Then testimonies. Edna, speaking from her hospital bed, admitted it all. Names. Dates. Places. Then others. Widows long presumed dead. Speaking. Alive. Saying their real names for the first time in years. The room went still. Except for the sound of those women speaking. When the doors locked from the inside, no one even resisted. They listened. Because now, they had no choice. Lena stood among them, no longer silent. No longer theirs. And none of them could look away. The chapel doors stayed shut for 7 more minutes after the final screen faded to black. Nobody moved. Not even Gloria. It was like the air had turned thick and sticky, like the space around us had become impossible to walk through. I watched her closely. Gloria didn't blink. Her arms were stiff at her sides. She looked at Lena like she was watching someone rise from a grave that should have stayed sealed. I wondered, in that moment, if she still believed she was right, or if the ritual had finally rotted in her hands. Then someone in the back stood up. It was Tara, the teenage niece who used to spy on Lena's movements. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear. She asked one question, quietly, as if she were asking herself, "Did we kill them?" No one answered. Another cousin stood up. Then one of the uncles. Then Micah. It took only 30 seconds for the whole thing to collapse. Arguments erupted. People shouted over each other. Some demanded names. Others defended the tradition, claiming the videos were staged. One of the younger men punched the wall hard enough to break 2 fingers. I slipped out during the chaos. Not because I was afraid, but because we'd planned for this exact moment. The plan wasn't just to expose the right. It was to scatter its pieces. Lena left first, dressed in a widow's coat she'd hidden behind the altar. A car waited 3 blocks away. I watched her walk across the frost-covered grass without looking back once. She was gone in under 4 minutes. By the time the chapel doors were finally opened by local authorities, called in by an anonymous tip, Lena was already miles away, riding in the back seat of a tan sedan driven by a woman named Elise, who had faked her own death back in '03. That should have been the end of it. For a few weeks, it looked like it was. A few family members were arrested. Nothing major. Charges related to fraud, coercion, falsified documents. No one got prison. They never do in cases like this. Gloria was placed under house restriction by the Council of Elders, a symbolic punishment meant to quiet things down. But everything was different now. I started getting messages. Not from strangers. From the inside. The daughters of women who died years ago. The sisters. The cousins. The friends. They'd watched the video footage from the ceremony, spread through the network like wildfire. They wanted to know more. They wanted to fight. Not escape, fight. By midweek, we had 19 new contacts. By the end of the month, over 40. Karen's house turned into a rotating shelter, with windows always covered and the front door never opened without a code word. Some of them had never been marked for the right. Some had been told since childhood that they would one day serve with honor. They weren't running anymore. They were organizing. And then came the 41st day. I didn't think it would matter anymore. The number had become symbolic, a ritual we no longer feared. But that morning, I woke to a handwritten letter pushed under our door. No return name. No envelope. Just one sentence. It always comes back. Inside was a printed photo, grainy, scanned from what looked like an old VHS frame. It showed a woman I didn't recognize, kneeling beside a man's casket. Her mouth was sewn shut with red thread. That same evening, I logged into one of our encrypted inboxes and found a flagged message with a subject line that read, "The rights have moved." There was a location, Texas, a ranch estate outside of Elms Ridge. A new ceremony. Same structure. Different name. They were calling it Crossing. No more cups. No more tea. Just silence, song, and willing surrender. But it was the same thing. The same violence dressed up as grace. Lena was gone, truly gone. We hadn't heard from her in 2 weeks. That was part of the plan. If she wanted to resurface one day, she would. If not, she owed no one anything. Mom had started preparing new exit packets again. We made backup drives, rotated burners, ran deep web scrapes for names and triggers. It felt like we'd gone full circle. But that night, on the 41st night since Lena rose from the floor, I dreamed of her. She was standing at the edge of a field, wearing a coat I didn't recognize, hair cropped short like she'd cut herself free of something. Behind her, rows of women stood silent, all holding mirrors. But the mirrors reflected nothing. I woke up to a knock. One knock, then another. A pause, then one more. It was our code. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw a girl standing in the cold. She couldn't have been more than 17, barefoot, clutching a bundle in her arms, crying quietly but not broken. I opened the door without a word. She looked up and said, "Are you Sadie?" I nodded. "They tried to start it again," she whispered. "They made my sister do it. I need to stop them." I let her in. I didn't ask for her name. I didn't need to. Somewhere in that chapel, the chain broke. But somewhere else, someone was already welding a new one. We were still at war. And this time, they were getting smarter. I stayed up the whole night after the girl arrived. She didn't sleep, just sat at the kitchen table, holding her knees, staring at the darkened window. I gave her tea she didn't drink. Mom brought a blanket she didn't use. She didn't cry anymore. She looked like someone who had already burned through every tear she had. Her name was May. Her sister had gone through a new kind of rite in Elms Ridge just 3 days before. No cup, no prayers, just silence in a locked room. Her body was cremated without the family's consent. No one got to say goodbye. May found the burner phone in her sister's sock drawer. It had one contact. Ours. She'd run through the night with nothing but the clothes on her back and the baby photo of her sister folded in her palm. That morning, we gathered everything. May wasn't like Lena. She didn't want to fake her death. She didn't want to run. She wanted names. She wanted blueprints. She wanted justice. And I understood. I opened the encrypted drive marked Dust, our emergency playbook for when the network went cold and something worse began to spread. Inside were the names we never said aloud, the houses we couldn't touch, the places where the next version of the right might be hiding under a new name, with smoother edges and digital masks. They were evolving, just like we were. We weren't widows anymore. We were survivors. We were architects of ruin. We taught May how to disappear, then how to reappear as someone they'd never see coming. She picked her own name, her own identity, her own mission. 3 weeks later, she slipped into Elms Ridge posing as a grief counselor. 1 month after that, she sent us a coded message. Just a single word, fireplace. That meant, I've planted the evidence. They're going to see it. We watched from afar as the local news reported a leak of sealed documents from the estate tied to the new crossing ritual. Deaths mislabeled, medical reports altered, testimonies from girls as young as 15. Enough to make even the council backtrack. It wasn't everything, but it was a crack. And cracks spread. We've changed locations 4 times since then. The phones rotate. The drives encrypt themselves every 48 hours. We don't ask who's coming next. We just open the door when they knock. Sometimes I wonder how many more generations it'll take. How many more girls will show up barefoot in the night, holding someone else's name in their hands, hoping it's not too late. But then I remember the last thing Lena whispered before she vanished. If we die quietly, they win. So now we speak. Loud. Unbroken. And we make sure they never forget what silence tried to bury.